Most people know Adolf Hitler as the dictator who plunged the world into war and genocide. His name has become a symbol of destruction, hatred, and tyranny. But few people know that somewhere across the Atlantic, living quietly in the United States, was a young man who carried the same last name and the same blood. A man who made a choice that would have shocked the Führer himself. A man who decided that instead of supporting Germany, he would join the United States Navy and fight against his uncle's empire. This is the story of William Patrick Hitler, the nephew of Adolf Hitler, and how he went from living under the shadow of a tyrant to becoming a decorated American serviceman in World War II. A story that proves that history is never simple, and that even within the darkest families, someone can choose a completely different path. William Hitler was born in 1911 in Liverpool, England. His father was Adolf Hitler's half-brother, Alois Jr., a man with a reputation for gambling, drinking, and drifting between jobs. His mother, Bridget Dowling, was an Irishwoman who had no idea that the quiet Austrian man she married had a brother who would someday become one of the most infamous figures in human history. William grew up far from the political chaos of post-World War I Germany, but as Adolf Hitler's influence grew, William began to understand that his family name carried a shadow he couldn't escape. By the early 1930s, Adolf Hitler was rising to power, and William became curious. Who was this uncle he had never met? What was happening in Germany? And could his connection to the Hitler family somehow help him make a living? It was a morally gray decision, one that many biographers still debate. William traveled to Germany in 1933, when Hitler had just become chancellor. He expected opportunity. He expected privilege. What he found instead was a dictator who saw him as an inconvenience, and possibly a threat. When William entered the Nazi world, he found himself surrounded by propaganda, political power, and paranoia. He met Hitler multiple times, and each meeting was tense. Hitler didn't trust him. He didn't like him. And he certainly didn't want his curious foreign-born nephew roaming around Berlin with the Hitler name. On one hand, Hitler offered William minor jobs in banks and factories, hoping to keep him under control. On the other hand, William demanded more, better positions, more money, and special treatment. He felt entitled, and Hitler felt exploited. Their relationship became toxic almost instantly. Some Nazi officials feared William might someday publish information that could embarrass the Führer, especially stories involving Hitler's family history, illegitimate rumors, and early life struggles. And so, in 1938, Hitler made a chilling offer. If William renounced his British citizenship and became a full German citizen, then he might be given a high-ranking position. But William sensed the trap. If he gave up his British citizenship, he would be stuck in Hitler's Germany forever, at the mercy of a dictator who despised him. He refused, and that refusal may have saved his life. William fled Germany just before the war broke out. He returned to England, but the tension was far from over. Newspapers began to publish sensational stories about Hitler's English nephew. Some accused him of trying to blackmail his infamous uncle. Others claimed he had secrets that could destroy the Nazi myth. Regardless of the rumors, William knew the truth. Europe was collapsing. Hitler was preparing for war, and staying in England as a relative of the Führer was dangerous. So in 1939, William and his mother moved to the United States. There, William attempted to reinvent himself. He went on speaking tours about his uncle's personality, his ideology, and the terrifying future that Germany was creating. Some Americans saw William as a courageous whistleblower. Others saw him as a man trying to cash in on his family name. But all of that changed after the attack on Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, the United States entered World War II. And William Hitler made a decision that stunned the world. He wanted to join the US military and fight against Nazi Germany. Fight against the regime led by his own uncle. But joining the military was not simple. The FBI didn't trust him. The government didn't know if he was a spy, a liability, or a man truly seeking redemption. They questioned him relentlessly. But William didn't give up. He wrote letters to government officials, senators, and even directly to President Franklin Roosevelt asking for permission to enlist. Roosevelt personally approved the request. In 1944, William Hitler raised his right hand and swore an oath to defend the United States Constitution. The nephew of Adolf Hitler had officially joined the U.S. Navy. In uniform, William wasn't given special treatment. He served as a hospital corpsman, one of the most dangerous roles in wartime, providing medical care under fire, evacuating wounded soldiers, and risking his life repeatedly. His fellow sailors knew who he was, but many respected what he had done. While Adolf Hitler ordered the destruction of nations, his nephew was saving lives on American ships. The war was brutal, and William saw the horrors firsthand. Bombings, burned bodies, amputations, the kind of suffering that defined World War II. And yet he kept working, determined to prove he was nothing like the man whose blood he shared. He earned the American Victory Medal, the European African Middle East Campaign Medal, and the Purple Heart. The same name that represented destruction in Europe now appeared on a U.S. military commendation list for saving lives instead of taking them. When the war ended in 1945, and Hitler committed suicide in his bunker under Berlin, William felt a complex mix of emotions. He had fought on the right side of history, but he could never escape the last name that had become synonymous with evil. After receiving an honorable discharge in 1947, William made a final, irreversible decision. He changed his last name to protect his children, his wife, and his future. He took his mother's maiden name and became William Patrick Stewart Houston. He disappeared from public life. No more interviews, no more newspapers, no more speaking tours. William wanted the Hitler name to die with his uncle. He moved to Long Island, opened a small business, and lived as quietly as possible. He married a German woman named Phyllis, and together they raised 4 sons, none of whom would ever marry or have children. Many historians believe the Stewart Houston family made this choice intentionally, to ensure that Adolf Hitler's bloodline would never continue. William died in 1987, having lived a life most people could never imagine. The nephew of a dictator, the enemy of his own uncle's empire, and a veteran who fought for the opposite side. It is one of history's strangest and most powerful ironies. While Adolf Hitler tried to build a world based on hatred and racial supremacy, his own nephew fought for freedom, democracy, and the very country he declared an enemy. William Hitler's story reminds us of something deeper, that family does not decide destiny, that blood does not define morality, and that even in the shadow of history's darkest figures, some people choose a completely different path. And sometimes, the greatest rebellion is simply choosing to do what is right.